Ian Smith was born in 1919 in Rhodesia, a British colony in southern Africa. He grew up in a society deeply divided along racial lines where a small white minority held absolute power over the black African majority. Smith embraced this racist ideology from a young age.
Smith's political career began in the 1940s when he joined the Rhodesian Front, a white supremacist political party. Smith quickly rose through the ranks, becoming a prominent voice for white minority interests. He was elected Prime Minister of Rhodesia in 1964, a key figure in southern Africa's history.
In 1965, facing growing international pressure to dismantle white minority rule and grant independence to Rhodesia under majority rule, Ian Smith made a fateful decision. He unilaterally declared Rhodesia's independence from Britain, a move known as the Unilateral Declaration of Independence, UDI. This act of defiance was a desperate attempt to cling to power and preserve white supremacy in Rhodesia.
The UDI was met with widespread condemnation from the international community. The United Nations declared it illegal and imposed economic sanctions on Rhodesia. Britain, the former colonial power, refused to recognize the Smith regime and severed diplomatic ties.
Despite the international backlash, Smith remained defiant. He believed that Rhodesia could withstand the pressure and that white rule would ultimately prevail. He portrayed the black nationalist movements fighting for majority rule as puppets of the Soviet Union and a threat to the Western world.
The international sanctions imposed on Rhodesia began to bite. The country's economy, heavily reliant on exports of tobacco, chrome, and other minerals, suffered a severe downturn. Unemployment soared, and inflation skyrocketed.
Moreover, the guerrilla war intensified, with black nationalist fighters launching attacks on white farms, military installations, and infrastructure. The two main nationalist groups, the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU, and the Zimbabwe African People's Union, ZAPU, received support from neighboring countries like Zambia and Mozambique.
The Rhodesian security forces, though well-equipped and trained, found themselves increasingly stretched thin as the war dragged on. The conflict took a heavy toll on both sides, with thousands of lives lost and countless others displaced from their homes.
Despite the mounting pressure, Smith remained intransigent. He refused to negotiate with the black nationalist leaders whom he dismissed as terrorists. By the late 1970s, international sanctions, guerrilla warfare, and internal pressure had taken their toll on the Smith regime.
The Rhodesian economy was in ruins, security forces were exhausted, and white emigration had reached alarming levels. Even Smith's staunchest allies realized his time was running out.
In 1978, under pressure from South Africa, Smith agreed to a settlement with moderate black leaders. This led to a transitional government with Bishop Abel Muzorewa as prime minister. However, ZANU and ZAPU rejected the settlement and continued their armed struggle.
The war continued until 1979, when a peace conference was held in London, chaired by British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. The Lancaster House Agreement in December 1979 led to a ceasefire and the creation of an independent Zimbabwe.
In 1980, Zimbabwe held its first democratic elections. Robert Mugabe emerged victorious, becoming the country's first prime minister.
Ian Smith's legacy is a complex and controversial one. To his supporters, he was a visionary leader who stood up for his beliefs and defended his country against communism and terrorism.
However, to the vast majority of Zimbabweans, Smith is remembered as a symbol of oppression and racism. His regime's policies of segregation, discrimination, and violence left an indelible mark on the country, fueling racial tensions and economic inequality that persist to this day.
Smith's UDI, a desperate attempt to cling to power, ultimately backfired, plunging Rhodesia into a protracted and bloody conflict that cost thousands of lives and destroyed the country's economy.
Ian Smith died in 2007, unrepentant to the end. He maintained that he had acted in the best interests of Rhodesia and that white rule had been a force for good in Africa. However, history will likely judge him harshly as the architect of a racist and oppressive regime that left a legacy of pain and division in its wake.